well-connected individual in the very inner circle of the British throne, a man originally trained to be an Anglican minister named Charles Darwin, together with his equally wealthy and even more brilliant first cousin, Francis Galton, produced recipes for social control which caught the attention of the most powerful people on earth. Galton in particular was fixated on social control more than academic science. He wasted little time in warning what unchecked breeding and hyper-democracy could do to the established social order, and what it would do to the best biological stock. And then he showed how institutional schooling could be used as a laboratory through which schemes to protect the best people could be silently inserted in the body politic. I mean at random, and there will be Galton books at your local library. Just take one of them. I mean, they're like peanuts. Once you've read one, you can't believe that a first-class mind with privileges up the wazoo can actually look at its fellow human beings this way, but it's worth a look at Galton. To pull off a mass improvement plan of the size Galton wanted, aimed at human beings, would require a degree of surveillance on ordinary people never attempted before in history, and a set of instruments to perform social surgery with precision on an unsuspecting audience. I almost fell to the floor 2 days ago when I read in the business pages of Financial Times that Google, the search engine, is it? Google had a plan underway to completely map your personal habits, your movements on the internet, lifelong from infancy, and everything about your behavior with the announced intention of being able to tell you what job to take, how to use your spare time. Actually, the guy said, we'll be able to tell you what to do tomorrow with your spare time. This is the goal, and they're getting hundreds of thousands, soon to be millions of people to sign away their rights to privacy, and apparently not meeting any resistance. Just fascinating. Now, let's get to the big book that most people think of, Origin of Species. I would be surprised, I would fall dead if too many people in this room have actually read it, but we all know about it, and I actually have read the book. Don't bother. However, there's a chapter at the beginning of the book called Variation Under Domestication, and you see immediately that the story of the beagle sailing around the world and the slow observations made about natural selection has to be a fantasy. Not that he didn't sail around the world, but he had learned exactly what he taught from animal and plant breeders, and he acknowledges that in this chapter, Variation Under Domestication. In fact, you can almost hear him shouting. I'm quoting Mr. Darwin exactly here. He said, "Our eminent breeders have in a single lifetime modified to a large extent their breeds of cattle and sheep." He abundantly illustrates this in this chapter, the remarkable effects that can be achieved through what he calls controlled interventions. So, not so obvious in this positive catalog of improvements that a plant breeder or an animal breeder can make is the fact that controlled intervention's a two-way street, and you can also use it to eliminate the bad breeding stock. Hardly anyone, says Darwin, these are his words, is so careless as to breed from his worst except mankind. Now, we're talking here not about the scientist you read about in high school science. We're talking about one of the handful of wealthiest men on earth. I'll bet you didn't read that anywhere. A fortune, a titanic fortune. His daily companions were kings and dukes and princes. That's why his plan spread so instantaneously around the world. He didn't bother to talk to college professors. I mean, talk to anybody. But he had the power connection and the money to indulge. After Darwin, Herbert Spencer, the British philosopher, invented the brutal phrase, survival of the fittest, to describe the outcome of nature's process. But I really want to put my foot down here. They weren't describing the outcome of nature's process. That's the theory. What they were describing was the outcome of artificial selection, not natural selection. Artificial selection has proven itself over and over again in human history. But whether nature works that way is a theory filled with holes, and the holes are never discussed in school textbooks. A curious sidebar of all this is the strange fact that Herbert Spencer, the champion of Darwin from the far right, was actually the uncle of the legendary Beatrice Webb. Does that name mean anything to you? She was the founder of Fabian socialism. She's the only woman ever buried in, Westminster Cathedral? I mean, Beatrice was the big time where power is concerned, and she seemed to represent the left. But on Herbert Spencer's deathbed, they sat together and they both agreed they wanted the same outcome. Mrs. Webb would kill the unfit with kindness, and Mr. Spencer with harshness, but both wanted the unfit dead. That information comes from Kitty Muggeridge's biography of Beatrice Webb. That's Malcolm Muggeridge's daughter, and he was a big publisher in London, I think. In a book published 12 years after the article I told you about this morning, Darwin is much more direct in his analysis. He said, when an inferior race like the Irish crossbreeds with an advanced race like the English, man descends the evolutionary ladder. It marches backwards. And Galton, a much worldlier fellow than his cousin Charles, urged men of power to use the breeder's art to improve human stock. He wrote a book in 1869 that I know anyone in here would love to read. It's called Hereditary Genius, and I guarantee you it will be in libraries in Brisbane. He said this as a quote, "It's quite practical to produce a highly gifted race. The science to do this," he invented it on the spot, "is called eugenics." Cousin Galton instantly gained important followers all through the world, especially in the United States, though. His pronouncements on biology and schooling, and he had lots to say about school being useful in this process, had profound effects. The statistical clouds which cloaked the nonsense of pedagogy and all the so-called social sciences the t-tests and all the rest, are a direct implantation of Galton, who was a world-class mathematician. Conversion from an older style of social thinking to a number-clotted, chart-racked, footnote-choked descendant form followed Galton's wish to make strategic social declarations seem to be scientific in mimicry of the hard sciences like physics and chemistry. In the 1920s, following Galton's advice, the United States Supreme Court ruled in favor of forced abortion of the feeble-minded. Buck versus Bell is the case. It's pure Galton, and it led to the death of 35,000 children of people who were feeble-minded. How were they determined to be feeble-minded? A family doctor would sign a paper saying that. And how do I know that? Because in a famous case, a woman was about to inherit a huge fortune from her father, and I believe it was her brother had the family physician declare her feeble-minded, and the will said that if she were institutionalized, the money would pass to the brother. Now let me tell you something else that's right under all our noses. During the 1930s, during the rise of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, constant delegations came from Germany and Japan to study racial science in the United States, particularly in the state of Indiana, where these abortions, forced abortions, were taking place in record numbers. And during the Nuremberg Trials, after the end of the Second World War, what I've never met one human being who knows, because we're not told, there wasn't one Nuremberg trial, there were two. There was a separate trial for the doctors who ran the biological experiments on the concentration camp inmates. And every single one of them said in their own defense, we were simply following patterns pioneered by the United States and Great Britain. And they called forced sterilization in Germany the Indiana procedure. You can see why this second set of Nuremberg hearings is not openly talked about, but they're available. See, once you know these things, it's right up on the surface. Just give me a minute here. One of the principal reasons for extending childhood was the children feel stress more strongly than older people who've experienced it a lot. So the effects of stress are more effective on kids than they are on older people. And if you want to stop people from breeding later in life, one of the known ways to do that statistically is to stress them in youth. Like I have 20 minutes, you're having tests on Friday, you're having standardized tests in March, and if you don't pass the tests, something awful will happen. So now comes the brilliance, though. If school could be used, and this is Galton's invention, as a constant stress mechanism on children, then the birth rate would in time drop. Not right away, but in time. In 1976, I believe, the birth rate in the United States went negative and it has remained negative ever since. And you say, but the country's getting bigger. Not getting bigger by women having children, getting bigger by bringing in cheap labor from overseas. So you get the effect that everything's as it always was. It's steeply negative in the United States. I think we have 1.1 child per couple, and you need 2.1 in order just to maintain your population. You need that extra fraction because some kids die before they reach the majority. Each weapon of mass instruction I've mentioned so far, schooling sold as education, the artificial extension of childhood, the dumbing down of intellect, the dumbing down of principle, the trapped flea strategy, and the creation of a theory of biological inferiority that guides this planning stage. All of these things are stressors of the first water. So Galton became deeply embedded in the fabric of forced schooling almost from the beginning. His ideas remain at the heart of that fabric today, working like the little mill that grounds salt. But other forces are active as well. But as we leave Galton, the clear sign of his presence is manufactured stress, which seems to have no purpose. If standardized tests don't correlate with anything at all other than your grade on the next standardized test, then they would seem to be an expensive form of insanity, wouldn't they? No, they actually have a great effect as a stressor, not that anyone who administers those tests is aware of that or is aware of the inability of statistical science to show a correlation with these tests that hasn't been rigged in advance. If you say, for example, you can't go to medical school unless you get certain scores on these tests, then you can point to doctors and say, look, they all have high standardized test scores. But that's only because you've legislated that, not because those people make better doctors. Okay, now we're ready for the horse in a box strategy. And this is a testimonial to the wonderful resources that are hidden in the human imagination. Would you believe that a magazine exists called the Horse Mental Health Journal? It's actually the Equine Mental Health Journal. How do I know that? Because somebody from the state of Kentucky, that's a big horse state in the U.S., mailed me a copy and marked an article on it, and they said, does this have anything to do with school? And what it was about is how to keep your horse from going insane. Now, you probably didn't know that if you were crazy enough to want to make horses crazy, it's known how you do that. And it isn't very difficult. A lot of people innocently drive their horses insane because they don't understand the dynamic at work. So let me tell you how you drive a horse insane. And the words are from the Mental Health Journal for Horses. Isn't it wonderful? I'm sorry, I'm just delighting in that for a moment. You keep the horse in a small stall, and the area it has to run around outside of the stall is also small. You keep the horse predominantly idle. You keep the horse apart from other horses. You keep the horse from accessing the wisdom of the herd and the wisdom of its own nature, which it only learns by running at top speed and leaping around. But if it's in a small space, it can't learn that. And these are the effects. The conclusion is you will create an animal that interacts with the world in ways that are clearly unnatural. You get a horse that simultaneously is timid, undependable, bolting, bucking, avoidant, shying. It's crazy, in other words. You get a horse that doesn't know where it belongs in the world. And then the conclusion is just murder. Under such conditions, well-bred horses with tremendous potential end up living their lives as consumers instead of contributors. All you have to do is put producers in place of contributors, and what we have is a way to curtail overproduction by limiting the range of experiences and the range of risk-taking necessary to learn your own nature. So, I'm at the overproduction section, so I'm going to now be able to skip that, and I probably have 10 minutes left. There's a few other of these that are, oh, gee, a lot of overproduction. Yeah. I mentioned this briefly this morning, but this is a huge one. Divide and conquer. Consumers, future consumers, need to be divided from one another. What you don't want in an ideal marketing world are people who confer with one another. So there's like a group wisdom that affects buying habits. You want them each to be isolated there. So if they have associates, it interferes with buying decisions. So this divide and conquer principle is an important aspect of marketing. You're much more susceptible to emotional appeals if you're not sitting around, with people who might be tougher-minded than you are. A small political elite in control of communications, that the advertising business, TV, computer games, can split working people and the poor away from the natural alliances they need to protect themselves. And then I went into Spain, Britain, and France and Iraq, which we don't need to do again. Standardized testing, we've talked about, the major weapon. The short answer test. This I got from Oxford University, so this must be the truth. Somewhere in or around 1905, Oxford University declared in the gentlemanly way it does that their professional staff was not to use short answer testing, or if they did, it was not to count at all in the final determination. Why did Oxford say that? Sorry, I'm losing my voice. The short answer test, with its fixation on disconnected bits of data, is an exercise in damaging the ability of the mind to think in complex wholes. The watermark of an educated mind is contextual knowledge. That means connecting the dots, not memorizing them, but showing how they relate with one another, interpreting them. And that does not coexist easily with memory bit knowledge, which is the sign of a schooled mind or of an idiot savant. If right answers are reduced to being what you've been told to memorize, then you have been conditioned like a rat or a dog to be susceptible to the will of your handlers. Your ability to handle contextual thinking has been damaged without your conscious awareness. And over 12 years practice doing this short answer style, you are really a mess at the end of that time. You've had circuits implanted in your brain which can be activated from outside whenever a need arises to control your inner world. If you think mainly in fact bits, like a quiz show contestant, you have already declared yourself to people in the know to be an inconsequential opponent, nobody to be feared. Only folks skilled in dialectical thinking and deep context knowledge make formidable adversaries over the long haul. Short answer fraud cuts more deeply than the other categories of test criticism I've given you, because it works to structurally alter the ability of your mind to locate truth. And the last one we'll talk about, although now the pump's primed, you would be able to put together your own interpretation of the weapon structures. But the last one, once again, the absurdity of it is right on the surface. It's so obvious that none of us think about. What on earth does competition have to do with learning anything? Anything at all. Driving an automobile, mixing together peroxide, drain cleaner, and peroxide, drain cleaner, and paint remover to make the bomb that blew up the London subways. That's all it was. It was those three ingredients with some sawdust in to stabilize it and a cell phone planted. Now, I don't know how to use a cell phone to set off a bomb, but I'll bet sitting in this room there is at least one person, and probably more, who do know how to do that. Don't tell me, because... Anyway, winners and losers. The schools start in kindergarten with absolutely meaningless contests, daily contests, to create winners and losers. Do we, in fact, stuff kids in compartments where everyone knows where the winner compartments are and the loser compartment? What does it feel like to be in a loser compartment for 10 of your 12 years? I would imagine it eliminates you from being very effective in your life forever and ever. There. What on earth do these competitions have with learning? You want to learn to be able to speak to any kind of an audience? Fine. In Brisbane, I see there are people from all over the world. Get your kid out to talk to those people. Invite them into your home for dinner. Make your kid carry his or her share of the conversational weight, and you will create an effective speaker. Just like that. It's that easy to do. If your kid wrote 50 words a day for a year, then 100 words a day for the second year, then 200 words a day for the third year, and 300 words a day for the fourth year, without any intervention at all or red marks on the paper, I guarantee you the kid would become a very competent writer. And what types of writing demand more than about 300 words? Not many. If you need longer, you just do 300-word packages and stick them together. Read Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. I pray as homeschoolers you will do that, and find out what kind of a curriculum a 12-year-old boy who's working at a hard job 60 hours a week in his spare time puts himself and his friends through, and how he teaches himself to be a writer so good that he talks the King of France out of so much money to pay for the American Revolution that France goes into a revolution immediately because that money was earmarked for bribes to keep the lid on the resistance. And this